All right, let's get right into it. We're going to try and unravel one of the most tangled, long-running geopolitical puzzles out there, the border dispute between India and China. And trust me, it's a wild story of ancient empires, colonial mapmakers, and a very modern, very tense power struggle. So the big question right off the bat is, why is this border so ridiculously confusing? I mean, it's not like other international boundaries. This one is a total mess of historical claims, lines that were never really drawn, and two completely different ideas of where the border even is. And we're going to get to the bottom of how it got this way. This quote just perfectly sums up the whole paradox, doesn't it? You hear officials say, no territory has been lost, but then you see these incredibly intense, violent clashes on the news. How can both be true? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack, and the answer is all about how you define the border in the first place. Okay, to really get this, we have to get our terms straight. First, you've got the border with Pakistan. That's the line of control, the LOC. It's marked, it's fenced, and for the most part, everyone knows where it is. But with China, it's the line of actual control, the LAC. And it's the total opposite. It's vague, it's not physically marked anywhere, and both countries have their own idea of where the line should be. That ambiguity right there is the seed of the entire problem. So, to find out where all this confusion started, we have to rewind. I mean, way, way back, long before modern India or China were even a thing. This is where the first clues are buried. So, picture this. Way back in 625 AD, Ladakh was just a part of this huge Tibetan empire. But then the empire fell apart, and out of it came the independent kingdom of Ladakh. Now here's the important part. This new kingdom started making formal borders. In 1684, you get the Treaty of Tingmaskong, the first real line on a map. Then, fast forward to 1842, after a big war, the Treaty of Chushul basically reconfirmed those same boundaries. And this, right here, is the absolute core of India's historical argument, that 1842 treaty wasn't just a local deal between Ladakh and Tibet. Nope, representatives of the Emperor of China were there, and they signed it too. This meant that, at the time, China itself officially recognized a border that put the entire Aksai Chin region inside Ladakh's territory. Remember that. Okay, now let's jump forward in time. A whole new player enters the scene, the British Empire. And they've got completely different reasons for drawing lines on maps, which is where things start to get really complicated. See, the British couldn't have cared less about ancient treaties. They were obsessed with something called the Great Game, basically a 19th century Cold War against Russia. They were terrified of Russia expanding south towards India, so they started drawing these defensive borders to create a buffer zone. It wasn't about local accuracy, it was about imperial security. And this obsession led to two totally different maps. First, you had the Johnson Line in 1865. It was super ambitious, grabbing all of Aksai Chin for British India. And that's the line that India bases its official claim on today. But then, a few decades later, the British got nervous. They didn't want to anger China and push them towards Russia, so they proposed the Macartney-MacDonald line, which gave most of Aksai Chin back to China. The funny thing? China never even bothered to reply, so the whole thing was left in this bizarre state of limbo. And the mess wasn't just in the West. Over in Ladakh, in the East, you had the 1914 Simla Convention. The British proposed the McMahon Line to separate Tibet from what we now call Arunachal Pradesh. Chinese representatives were there, they took part in the talks, but when it came time to sign on the dotted line, they refused. So yet another proposed border left hanging. Okay, let's jump to the middle of the 20th century. Up to this point, India's neighbor was Tibet, which acted as a giant natural buffer. But then two massive events happened back to back that completely redrew the map and changed the game forever. And just look at how fast this all went down. 1947, India becomes independent and inherits all those messy British claims. Just 2 years later, Mao's Communist Party takes over China. And the very next year, 1950, they invade and swallow up Tibet. Suddenly, that buffer was gone. Poof! For the first time ever, the armies of modern India and modern China were staring at each other directly, which led, almost inevitably, to the war in 1962. And this is probably the single most important thing to get. The line of actual control, the LAC, we hear about all the time, isn't a real border. It's not something decided by diplomats with a treaty. It is, quite literally, just the line on the ground where the fighting stopped in 1962. It's a ceasefire line born from conflict that was never meant to be permanent. So, the 1962 war ended, but the conflict, oh, that was far from over. It just morphed into something new. A long, grinding phase of constant, low-level friction along this poorly defined line. Things were so tense that in the 1990s, both countries signed some peace deals to try and calm things down. And one of the key rules they agreed to was no guns or explosives along the LAC. Now, that one rule explains everything. It's the reason why the clashes you see on the news look so brutal and almost medieval. Soldiers fighting with fists, rocks, and nail-studded clubs. It's because firearms are technically banned. Now, since a full-blown war was off the table, China developed a different strategy, which a lot of people call salami slicing. The whole idea is brilliant in a way. You make tiny, tiny changes to the situation on the ground. Each little move, each slice, is so small that it's not worth starting a war over. But you keep doing it, and over time those slices really add up. So, what does this playbook actually look like on the ground? Well, it's a pretty clear four-step process. First, you build roads right up to the line, so you can move your troops fast. Second, you start making little unannounced patrols into new areas. Third, and this is key, you physically block Indian soldiers from getting to places they used to patrol. Then, after a big, tense standoff, you suggest creating a buffer zone to keep the peace. The catch? That buffer zone is carved out of land India used to control, effectively shifting the LAC, little by little. So what's the real-world impact of this slow-burn strategy? Well, you can boil it all down to one single, stark number: 26. What does that number mean? In this region, there are 65 specific locations called patrolling points, or PPs, that Indian troops are supposed to regularly monitor to assert their presence. Well, according to reports, as a result of this salami-slicing tactic, they can no longer physically get to 26 of those 65 points. And these aren't just vague areas we're talking about. These aren't specific numbered locations on the map. We're talking about whole stretches, like patrolling points 5 all the way to 17, or 24 to 32. These are places where Indian patrols used to go, but now they can't. This is how the line of actual control is being changed, not with a war, but just by changing the facts on the ground. All of this friction, this constant push and pull, has led us to where we are today. The conflict has evolved again, and now it's a high-stakes, high-altitude race against the clock. What's happening right now is a full-blown infrastructure race. For years, China was building roads and bases on their side. Now, India is frantically trying to catch up. Both sides are pouring billions into building roads, bridges, and strategic tunnels all along the LAC at a breathtaking pace. The whole border is basically a giant construction site. And the reason for all this construction is dead simple: speed. It's all about who can rush their troops, their tanks, and their supplies to the front line the fastest in a crisis. What was once one of the most remote, inaccessible frontiers on Earth is being turned into a hyper-militarized, hair-trigger flashpoint. So in the end, this isn't really a dispute about old maps and ancient treaties anymore. It's a very real, very physical competition being waged with concrete and steel at 15,000 feet. And it leaves us with one final, chilling question. In this high-altitude race on the roof of the world, who blinks first?